The weight of excellence. Emily Taylor, a highly accomplished black neurosurgeon, stood in the hospital corridor as another long, grueling shift drew to a close. The exhaustion in her body was undeniable, a blend of physical fatigue and emotional weariness, yet the passion for her work kept her going. She leaned against the cold walls of Westside Medical Center, watching her colleagues, most of them white, mostly male, exchange laughter and camaraderie. Though they shared the same profession, she often felt worlds apart. As Dr. Phillips, one of the senior surgeons, approached her, he offered a friendly nod and patted her on the shoulder. "Excellent work in surgery today, Dr. Taylor. You handled those complications with remarkable skill." "Thank you, Dr. Phillips," she replied, masking her discomfort with a polite smile. While the compliment was genuine, there was an unmistakable hint of hesitation in his eyes, a slight pause, as if he acknowledged her excellence despite her background, rather than for her merit alone. It was a subtle reminder of the unspoken bias she encountered daily. Her skill was undeniable, but acceptance, that was another matter entirely. Emily was no stranger to these feelings. She had worked tirelessly to earn her place, graduating top of her class, completing a grueling residency, and standing out in a competitive field. Yet, her accomplishments often seemed overshadowed by the color of her skin, rather than celebrated in their own right. She remained silent, knowing that her fight for recognition was far from over. As she left the hospital, the crisp evening air hit her face, reminding her of the chilly divide between her and her colleagues. The bus stop was just a few blocks away, but her steps felt heavy, weighed down by the invisible pressures she carried. She walked briskly, hoping to escape the thoughts that clouded her mind. In the dim glow of streetlights, she found herself alone with the questions she often pushed aside. Would she ever be seen for who she truly was, beyond the confines of race? A bus pulled up to the stop, and as she stepped forward, the doors opened with a loud hiss. She climbed aboard, clutching her purse and preparing to drop her fare into the machine. But as she approached, she caught the driver's piercing gaze. A middle-aged man with graying hair and a hardened expression, he glared at her with open disdain. "What, you think this is a free ride?" he sneered, his voice thick with contempt. Emily's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. "Excuse me." "You heard me," he said, his tone laced with hostility. "Just because you've got some fancy job doesn't mean you can waltz in here like you own the place." Emily felt a wave of humiliation wash over her as the other passengers glanced uncomfortably in her direction. She could sense the stares, feel the judgment in their eyes. Her pulse quickened as anger surged within her, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I paid my fare just like everyone else," she replied, her voice steady. The driver's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "Then maybe you should sit in the back. That's where people like you belong." Emily was frozen, her mind reeling from the sting of his words. She could have spoken up, could have challenged him, but the weight of 1,000 moments of silent endurance held her back. With a heavy heart, she moved to the back of the bus, feeling the crushing weight of degradation settle over her. Silent scars. The bus lurched forward, and Emily found herself staring blankly out the window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The city lights blurred past, casting a harsh glow on the cold, indifferent faces around her. She could feel the weight of the bus driver's scorn still pressing down on her, as though each mile amplified her feelings of invisibility. The murmurs of other passengers lingered in her ears, soft whispers and glances that seemed to dissect her, analyze her, like she was some kind of exhibit on display. Her thoughts churned with a mixture of pain and fury, a tempest of emotion she couldn't fully grasp. As she looked around, her eyes fell upon a young girl sitting a few seats down. The child, no older than 7, was watching her curiously, her wide eyes filled with innocence, curiosity, and a hint of concern. The girl's mother, however, quickly pulled her daughter closer, casting a wary glance in Emily's direction, as if her mere presence might be a threat. The message was clear: "You are other. You don't belong here. This was a message she had received in various forms all her life, in classrooms, in workplaces, even in her own neighborhood. She remembered being one of the few black students in her medical program, often overlooked during group discussions and called on only to fulfill diversity quotas. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how many achievements she collected, there always seemed to be a barrier separating her from the acceptance she longed for. But today was different. Today, she wasn't just ignored or overlooked. She was demeaned in public, stripped of her dignity in front of strangers. The bus driver's words echoed in her mind, each syllable sharpening her frustration into a blade that cut deeper than she expected. As the bus rolled to her stop, Emily rose from her seat, clutching her bag with white-knuckled fingers. Her heels clicked against the metal floor as she made her way to the front, each step heavy with an unfamiliar resolve. She approached the driver, her chin held high, though her heart thundered in her chest. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but firm. The driver turned, his expression indifferent. "What?" "I'm a doctor," she stated, forcing each word out like it was a truth she was reclaiming. "I've worked hard to be where I am, and I won't let you or anyone else treat me like I don't deserve respect." A few passengers turned to watch, their expressions mixed with surprise and something close to admiration. The driver, however, just scoffed. "Yeah, good for you," he said dismissively, not even bothering to look her in the eye. "Doesn't mean a thing to me." Emily's heart sank, her resolve wavered, but she swallowed her pride and stepped off the bus, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She wouldn't let this moment define her, but it would fuel her desire to create a world where no one, especially not young girls like the one she'd seen on the bus, would have to endure this kind of humiliation. As she walked down the dimly lit street, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from her friend and fellow doctor, Maya, a spirited woman who had been her anchor through the challenges of medical school and the uphill battle of professional life. "Maya, hey, just checking in. Crazy day at work. Hope you're okay." Emily hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, she thought about sharing her experience, but then decided against it. She didn't want to burden anyone with her struggles. Instead, she typed a quick response. "Emily, long day, but I'm fine. Thanks for checking in. Catch up soon." As she slipped her phone back into her pocket, she felt the gnawing ache of isolation deepen. Emily was used to putting up a brave front, even when it felt like the walls around her were closing in. But tonight, she couldn't shake the weight of what had happened, couldn't ignore the bitter reminder of how far she still had to go. She continued her walk home, her mind racing with thoughts of how to address this. She thought of the patients she treated every day, people who trusted her with their lives, who saw her skill and dedication without any regard for her skin color. It was in these moments of healing that she felt her truest self, connected and purposeful, her hands literally saving lives. Yet here, in the broader world, she was a target for casual cruelty, just another face dismissed and devalued. As she reached her apartment, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it, feeling the silence settle around her. In the darkness, Emily's emotions finally broke free, and she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the hurt she had held back. But amidst the tears and frustration, a new thought began to take shape. This incident had scared her, yes, but it had also ignited something within her. She had spent years excelling within the constraints society had placed on her, bending herself to fit a world that only reluctantly accepted her presence. But maybe it was time for change, not just for herself, but for others like her. Maybe it was time to do more than excel, to speak out and make her experiences known, to carve out a space where her voice, her dignity, and her humanity were acknowledged and celebrated. With renewed determination, Emily stood taller, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. She would turn this pain into power, this scar into strength, and in doing so, she would build a world where respect was not a privilege but a right, where no one would ever feel invisible again. A plan for change. Emily awoke the next morning with a heavy heart but a clear mind. The night had been restless, plagued by fragments of memories, the haunting echoes of the bus driver's scorn, and her own doubts. Yet, as the first light of dawn seeped through her window, a sense of clarity washed over her. She realized that she was done merely surviving these moments of prejudice. She was ready to fight them. For years, Emily had taken these encounters in stride, focusing on her career, proving herself with every surgery, every decision, and every patient she saved. She had tried to believe that her achievements alone would eventually earn her the respect and equality she craved. But she now understood that silently enduring mistreatment wasn't going to change anything, and it wasn't helping others who shared similar struggles. If she wanted a world where young black girls could aspire to be doctors without facing the same indignities, she would have to create it. Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. She couldn't change the hearts and minds of people overnight, but she could take steps to shine a light on these issues and create spaces for conversations that mattered. As she prepared her coffee, she jotted down ideas in her notebook, her thoughts flowing like a river unleashed after a storm. Address the hospital's culture. She knew that subtle biases in her workplace were just as damaging as the overt ones she faced elsewhere. Colleagues who hesitated to acknowledge her skill or subtly excluded her from conversations perpetuated an unspoken division. She decided she would approach the hospital administration about starting a committee to address diversity and inclusivity within the staff. Community outreach and mentorship. Emily recalled how isolated she felt throughout medical school, often being the only black woman in her classes. She wanted to create a mentorship program for young students of color, offering guidance and support as they pursued careers in medicine. She envisioned partnering with local schools, talking to students, and sharing her journey, both the victories and the struggles. Public awareness and advocacy. She had always been a private person, but recent events had made her realize the importance of sharing her story. Through her experiences, she could show others that prejudice still existed in the most unexpected places. Emily decided to reach out to her network, considering writing articles or speaking on panels about the challenges people of color face in medicine. Her words could bring awareness to a wider audience, giving a voice to those who felt unheard. Fueled by purpose, Emily arrived at the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose, her usual nervousness replaced by a determined resolve. The white halls of the hospital seemed different that morning, less daunting and more like a battlefield she was finally ready to face head-on. As she entered her office, she immediately noticed a notification on her phone. A message from Maya. Maya, I'm hearing rumors that some of the staff are giving you a hard time. Do you want to talk about it? Emily's fingers hovered over the phone screen. Maya had always been a solid support, but Emily hadn't told her about the incident on the bus. Sharing her plan with someone who understood her struggles sounded comforting, so she quickly typed a response. Emily, had a tough time yesterday, actually. I was humiliated on the bus by the driver, and it just got me thinking about how much we still face in and out of these walls. But instead of hiding, I'm planning to do something about it. Almost immediately, Maya replied. Maya, that's amazing. I've been thinking the same thing. Count me in for whatever you're planning. I'll help with the outreach program. These kids need role models like us. Emily smiled, feeling a sense of camaraderie she hadn't felt in a long time. Knowing she wasn't alone in her mission lifted a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. With Maya on board, she knew that their combined voices would make a bigger impact. As she went through her morning rounds, she noticed the subtle shifts in her colleagues' expressions. Dr. Phillips, the senior surgeon, offered her a strained smile, his eyes lingering on her just a beat longer than usual. Emily had grown used to reading between the lines, the subtle cues that revealed underlying bias. She returned his smile, but this time with a newfound strength. She no longer felt the need to appease or conform. She was ready to challenge the norms that had constrained her for too long. At lunchtime, Emily sat down with Maya in the hospital's small, crowded cafeteria. The two friends outlined their plans in hushed voices, each idea building upon the last. Maya, with her easy confidence and quick wit, suggested they arrange workshops on cultural sensitivity for the hospital staff, a program that would allow everyone to confront their unconscious biases in a constructive, safe environment. "We'll call it Project Respect," Maya proposed with a grin, scribbling the name in her notebook. Emily laughed. "I like it. Short, powerful, and exactly what we're after." Over the next few weeks, Emily and Maya worked tirelessly on their initiative. They scheduled meetings with the hospital board, presenting their case for why diversity training and mentorship programs weren't just a nice-to-have, but an essential part of a progressive healthcare institution. Though they faced resistance, their passion won them a few allies among the board members who understood the importance of inclusivity in the healthcare industry. Emily also reached out to local schools, arranging talks and events where she and Maya could connect with young students. Her excitement grew as she imagined the faces of young girls who, like her, aspired to be doctors, but had little representation to guide them. The thought of giving these girls the support she never had gave her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. Then, on a chilly Friday morning, as Emily prepared for her first public talk at a nearby high school, she noticed a familiar figure waiting at the bus stop outside her apartment. It was the same bus driver who had humiliated her weeks earlier. Her heart pounded, her mind racing through the encounter she tried so hard to move past. The familiar contempt was still etched into his face as he glanced at her with a dismissive look. But this time, Emily didn't lower her eyes or shrink under his gaze. She held her head high, exuding a confidence that came from a place of hard-won self-assurance. She didn't need his approval or anyone else's to know her worth. Her resolve, her purpose, was bigger than the pettiness of prejudice. In that moment, Emily felt a profound release, as though she had finally shaken off the chains of other people's judgments. She had transformed her pain into power, her scars into strength, and as the bus pulled away, leaving her in its wake, Emily knew she was ready for the journey ahead, ready to become the role model she had always sought, and to inspire a new generation of voices to rise above silence and shape a world where respect and equality reigned. Seeds of inspiration. The air in the high school auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Rows of eager students filled the seats, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. For many, this was just another assembly, a break from classes rather than a life-changing moment. But for Emily, it was an opportunity to plant seeds that might grow into something powerful and lasting. She stood behind the curtain, adjusting her notes one last time, feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves. Beside her, Maya offered a reassuring nod. "You've got this. Remember, they're just kids. Speak to them like you wish someone had spoken to you." Emily smiled, taking a deep breath. She had spent countless hours preparing for this talk, crafting her words carefully to reach beyond the surface and into the hearts of her young audience. But she hadn't realized until now how personal this moment truly was. She was no longer just a doctor. She was a mentor, a leader, a symbol of resilience for these students who might one day walk the same challenging path. As she walked onto the stage, the hum of student chatter quieted, and a hush fell over the room. Emily could see young faces staring up at her, some with genuine interest, others with a casual indifference that only teenagers could muster. She adjusted the microphone, looking out over the crowd, letting her gaze settle on a few students who seemed particularly attentive. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I'm Dr. Emily Taylor, and I'm here to share a story. Not just about becoming a doctor, but about what it takes to chase your dreams when the world seems determined to hold you back." A few murmurs swept through the audience, and she could see students sit up a little straighter, their curiosity piqued. She shared her journey, the challenges she faced as a young black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated field. She spoke about the sacrifices she made, the late nights of studying, the moments of self-doubt, and the relentless drive to prove herself in a system that often overlooked her. I'll never forget my first day in medical school, she continued, pausing as her gaze swept over the audience. I looked around, and I was one of only a handful of people who looked like me. The professors, the students, almost everyone else came from backgrounds that were nothing like mine. I felt alone, out of place, and sometimes even doubted if I truly belonged. But I made a promise to myself that day. I would work harder than anyone else in that room. A few students nodded, their expressions softening, their eyes reflecting a mix of empathy and admiration. Emily could tell her words were resonating. She spoke about the bus incident too, how even after reaching her dream, she was still forced to confront prejudice in the most unexpected ways. The world might see you one way, she said, her voice growing firmer. But it's up to you to define who you truly are. Don't let anyone tell you what you can or can't achieve based on their limited view of you. If I had listened to the voices of doubt, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be able to tell you that your dreams, no matter how big or small, are valid and worth fighting for. A stillness filled the auditorium as her words hung in the air. She could feel the weight of her message settling over them, see the spark of determination in a few students' eyes. In the front row, a young girl with dark, curly hair was listening intently, her eyes wide and unblinking. Emily recognized something in her, the same look of ambition, tempered by uncertainty, that she'd once carried herself. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, echoing off the walls of the auditorium. Emily was overwhelmed, but she managed to keep her composure, smiling and thanking the students. As the applause died down, she noticed the young girl from the front row making her way through the crowd. She stood there for a moment, looking nervous, before finally speaking up. "Dr. Taylor," the girl said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know someone like me could be a doctor. I didn't think it was possible." Emily's heart swelled. She knelt down to the girl's level, meeting her gaze. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Alicia," the girl replied, glancing down at her shoes before looking up again. "I've always wanted to be a doctor, but I don't know. It just feels like a dream, something that people like me don't really get to do." Emily placed a hand on Alicia's shoulder. "Alicia, I want you to remember something," she said, her tone warm and encouraging. "Dreams are meant to be big, a little scary even. But that doesn't mean they're out of reach. I didn't think I'd make it either, but I kept going, and so can you. Promise me you won't give up." Alicia's eyes shimmered with determination as she nodded. "I promise." After the talk, Emily and Maya were approached by the school principal, who commended them for their efforts. "Your story has really struck a chord with these kids," the principal said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've given them something real to aspire to, something beyond what they see in their everyday lives." As they made their way out of the school, Maya turned to Emily with a smile. "I think we've just planted the first seeds of something big, Em. These kids, they're going to carry your story with them, maybe even shape their futures around it." Emily nodded, feeling the warmth in her chest that overshadowed the ache of the past few weeks. She hadn't just shared her story. She had opened a door for others to walk through, offering them a glimpse of what was possible. The next few days were a whirlwind. News of Emily's talk had spread through the community, drawing attention from other schools, local organizations, and even a few media outlets. Soon, she found herself invited to speak at other venues, each new opportunity bringing more chances to share her journey and empower others. Emily's voice grew stronger with every story she told, every life she touched. But her journey was far from over. Even as she stepped into this new role, the challenges of her professional life continued. The biases, the subtle dismissals, the moments where her skill and authority were questioned. These didn't disappear overnight. Yet each time she encountered these obstacles, she felt a new resilience within herself, fueled by the knowledge that she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Alicia, for every young girl in her community, and for the countless others who would follow. One evening, after a long day of both surgeries and mentorship meetings, Emily found herself reflecting on her journey. The scars from her past experiences still lingered, reminders of the battles she had fought, and the ones she still faced. But instead of feeling weighed down by these scars, she now felt a sense of purpose in them. They were symbols of her resilience, of the strength she had found in her darkest moments. Emily realized that her life's purpose was no longer just about saving lives on the operating table. It was about saving dreams, nurturing the ambitions of those who had been told their aspirations were too big, too impossible. And as she prepared to go to sleep that night, a message from Alicia appeared on her phone. Alicia. Hi, Dr. Taylor. I just wanted to let you know I've been looking up everything about becoming a doctor. I'm not going to give up. Thank you for believing in me. Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a warmth flooding her heart. In that moment, she knew that her journey was bigger than any single achievement, any single moment of recognition. It was a journey of legacy, one where her life would ripple out into the lives of others, inspiring them to rise above the barriers they faced. With Alicia's message as a reminder of her impact, Emily closed her eyes, feeling more grounded and fulfilled than ever. She had set out to break down walls, and now she was building a bridge for others to cross, a path illuminated by her own trials, her own perseverance. And as she drifted off to sleep, she knew that her story was far from over. It was only the beginning. Breaking barriers. Emily's journey had become something much greater than herself. In the weeks that followed her talk at the high school, her schedule filled rapidly with invitations to speak at community centers, universities, and even medical schools. News outlets began reaching out, intrigued by the Black neurosurgeon who was not only breaking barriers in medicine, but also inspiring young people across the city. Each speaking engagement brought her face to face with countless individuals, each one carrying their own struggles and dreams. She saw her past self reflected in so many of them. Young people weighed down by a lack of representation, discouraged by the world's subtle reminders of their place. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Emily found herself in front of a packed lecture hall at a prestigious university. The room was buzzing with students and faculty alike, each eager to hear her story. As she took the podium, she noticed a few familiar faces, professors and students who had once doubted her. Today, they were in the audience, watching and listening. I didn't come here just to tell you about my journey, she began, looking across the sea of faces. I'm here to challenge you, to ask you to reconsider how you see those around you and how you see yourselves. She shared her experiences, from her struggles in medical school to the challenges of being a Black woman in a field where she was often underestimated. She spoke of the bus driver's cruelty, the subtle biases she encountered daily, and the moments when she nearly gave up. But she also spoke of resilience, of choosing to rise above, and of the responsibility she felt to make her story a beacon for others. By the end of her speech, a profound silence settled over the audience. Emily could feel the weight of her words resonating with them. She left the podium to a standing ovation, but what meant the most were the individual students who approached her afterward, some with tearful eyes, others with determined expressions. One young woman, Sarah, stayed behind, waiting until the crowd had thinned out. She was nervous, her hands clenched tightly, her face a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. Dr. Taylor, she began softly, her voice trembling. I wanted to thank you. I'm in my first year of medical school, and I was ready to quit. I kept thinking that maybe I just don't belong here. But hearing your story, it makes me think that maybe I can do this too. Emily placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. Sarah, you're stronger than you think. Remember, every doubt you have is a stepping stone. Use it to push yourself forward, not to hold yourself back. As Sarah walked away, her posture more confident than before, Emily felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced in her life. She had gone from being the outsider to becoming the very person she had needed as a young student, and now she was passing that strength on to others. The next day, Emily received a call from the hospital's administration. Dr. Langford, the chief of staff, invited her to his office for a meeting. Emily's heart raced, her mind churning with possibilities. Since starting Project Respect with Maya, Emily had been pushing the hospital to implement diversity and sensitivity training, but progress had been slow. Maybe this was the breakthrough she'd been waiting for. When she arrived, Dr. Langford greeted her with a warm, if somewhat reserved, smile. He motioned for her to sit, and she settled into the chair across from his desk. "Emily," he began, leaning forward with his hands folded, "I want you to know that your work with Project Respect has been nothing short of remarkable. The board has taken notice, and we're considering expanding your program hospital-wide. We want to see if it can make a real difference in our culture here." Emily felt a surge of hope. "Thank you, Dr. Langford. I really believe that this initiative can create an environment where everyone feels valued and respected, no matter their background." Dr. Langford nodded. "I agree. But there's something more I wanted to discuss with you. We've been receiving a lot of inquiries from media and community leaders about the work you're doing here. You've become somewhat of a spokesperson for the hospital, and it's clear that your story has had a powerful impact. The board is considering creating a new position, an outreach and diversity officer, and we'd like you to take it." Emily was taken aback. The position he was proposing would allow her to work full-time on her advocacy efforts, not only within the hospital but throughout the entire medical community. She would still be a surgeon, but her new role would enable her to reach even more people, affecting change on a broader scale. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her mind racing. This was an opportunity beyond anything she'd imagined, a chance to solidify her work and leave a lasting legacy. "Take some time to think it over," Dr. Langford replied with a reassuring smile. "We're not asking you to decide right now, but just know that we believe in what you're doing, and we're behind you." Emily left his office feeling a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The idea of stepping into such a visible role was daunting, but she knew that her journey had led her to this point. She couldn't ignore the impact her story was having. The students, the community, even her colleagues were beginning to see her not just as a talented surgeon, but as a force for change. Over the next few days, Emily's mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. She confided in Maya, who encouraged her wholeheartedly, insisting that this was exactly the opportunity Emily had been fighting for. "This isn't just about you, Em," Maya said one evening over coffee. "This is about paving the way for everyone who comes after us. You'd be setting a precedent, showing other hospitals what it means to prioritize diversity and respect." Finally, after days of consideration, Emily made her decision. She scheduled a follow-up meeting with Dr. Langford and accepted the position. Her new title was Chief Diversity and Outreach Officer, a role that had never before existed in the hospital's history. The news spread quickly, and soon, Emily found herself at the forefront of a movement that was rippling through the medical community. Her first initiative was to expand Project Respect beyond sensitivity training. She introduced workshops on cultural competency, mandatory seminars on unconscious bias, and mentorship programs aimed at supporting minority medical students and interns. She reached out to other hospitals, forming partnerships to create a network of medical professionals committed to inclusivity and equality. Her work didn't stop at the hospital walls. She began collaborating with community leaders and local politicians, advocating for policies that would improve healthcare access and equity for underrepresented communities. But her most rewarding work came through the mentorship program. Every month, she met with students, young medical professionals, and aspiring doctors, sharing her story and listening to theirs. She had become a beacon of hope for those who had once felt marginalized and voiceless. The program flourished, attracting support from donors, community organizations, and prominent figures in the medical field. One evening, as she was leaving the hospital, she noticed a familiar face at the bus stop. The same driver who had humiliated her months ago. This time, he didn't sneer or dismiss her. Instead, he gave a curt nod, an acknowledgement, however reluctant, of her presence and her worth. Emily returned the nod, feeling a profound sense of closure. She realized she no longer needed his approval or anyone else's. She had built her own path, a path that was now paved with the dreams and aspirations of countless others who would follow. Her journey had transformed from a personal struggle to a movement, one that resonated beyond her experiences and into the lives of everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. As she walked away from the bus stop, Emily felt a weight lift off her shoulders, replaced by a sense of freedom and purpose she had never known. She was no longer just a doctor, no longer just a woman breaking barriers in her field. She was a catalyst for change, a symbol of resilience, and a voice that refused to be silenced. Her story was far from over. In fact, it was only the beginning of a legacy that would inspire generations to come, a legacy of strength, dignity, and an unwavering belief in the power of one's voice to reshape the world. The legacy of a trailblazer. Years passed, and Emily Taylor's life unfolded in ways she had never imagined. The walls of her office at Westside Medical Center bore testament to her journey. Framed certificates, newspaper clippings, and photographs from countless community events and mentorship programs. Her role as Chief Diversity and Outreach Officer had transformed the hospital into a model for equity and inclusion in healthcare, a place where people of all backgrounds felt welcome and valued. She had become a symbol of change, her influence reaching far beyond the hospital walls and rippling through the medical field and community alike. As she sat at her desk one afternoon, reviewing applications for the mentorship program, her assistant knocked on the door. "Dr. Taylor, someone is here to see you," her assistant said with a bright smile. "She says she's an old friend." Curious, Emily set her pen down and stood up. In walked a woman she recognized instantly, Alicia, the young girl who had once approached her after a high school talk, full of dreams but hesitant about her place in the world. Now, Alicia was a young woman, poised and confident, dressed in a crisp white lab coat with her name embroidered in elegant script. Alicia. Emily's face broke into a wide smile as she walked around her desk to embrace her. "Look at you, Dr. Alicia Williams. It's got a nice ring to it." Alicia beamed, her eyes shining with a mixture of joy and gratitude. "I owe it all to you, Dr. Taylor. You're the reason I'm here today." They settled into chairs across from each other, Alicia's expression one of awe as she took in the surroundings. Emily's office wasn't just a testament to her achievements. It was a living tribute to the countless lives she had touched. Photos of mentorship sessions, candid shots of her speaking at rallies, and awards recognizing her impact decorated the walls, telling a story that stretched far beyond her own life. "You know," Alicia began, her voice steady but emotional, "I still remember every word you said that day at my high school. I was just a kid, and the idea of becoming a doctor seemed impossible. But you made it real for me. You made me believe that someone like me could belong in medicine." Emily listened, feeling the familiar swell of emotion she experienced whenever one of her mentees shared their story. It was these moments that had come to define her legacy, not the accolades or the promotions, but the profound life-changing impact she had on individuals who, like herself, once felt invisible. Alicia continued, "There were days when I wanted to quit, when I doubted everything. But then I'd remember your story, how you faced prejudice, and kept going. Every time I thought I'd reached my limit, I'd think, if Dr. Taylor could do it, so can I." Emily reached across the table, placing a hand over Alicia's. "And now you're here, living proof that nothing is impossible. You're going to be a light for others, just like you were for me that day." Alicia smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I wanted to tell you in person. I've accepted a position here at Westside. I'll be working alongside you, and I can't wait to help with the mentorship program." Emily felt a surge of pride and joy, the kind that came only from seeing her life's work come full circle. Alicia wasn't just another mentee. She was a living testament to the power of belief and perseverance. Together, they would continue the work, each inspired by the other, each carrying forward the legacy of resilience and compassion. As they spoke about their plans for the program, A thought lingered in Emily's mind, a memory of the countless battles she'd fought over the years. She remembered the sleepless nights, the instances of humiliation, the endless days of proving her worth to those who doubted her. But looking at Alicia, she knew every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt had been worth it. Each obstacle had been a stepping stone, not only for herself, but for those who would follow in her footsteps. That evening, after Alicia left, Emily walked the halls of the hospital, reflecting on how much had changed since she first started. The faces around her were more diverse, the atmosphere more inclusive. Staff members greeted each other warmly, and there was a sense of unity she had once only dreamed of. Her vision had become a reality, not through her efforts alone, but through a collective will to create something better, a culture where every person was valued for who they were and the skills they brought. As she passed a group of interns in the break room, she overheard one of them say, "Dr. Taylor is the reason I wanted to work here. She's like a legend." Emily chuckled to herself, touched by their words, but humbled by the knowledge that her legacy was now much larger than her own achievements. She had become a symbol of change, a pillar of hope for those who felt they had no place in the world of medicine. Her story had been passed down, evolving from a personal journey to a collective mission, one that would inspire future generations long after she was gone. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Emily received an email that took her by surprise. It was from a major medical university, inviting her to give the commencement speech at their upcoming graduation ceremony. The email described how her work in advocacy and her unyielding dedication to equity had set a new standard in the field of medicine. She was being recognized not only as a doctor, but as a visionary, a leader whose story had transformed the lives of countless individuals. Emily accepted the invitation, realizing that this speech would mark a new chapter in her journey. She would address future doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals, a generation who would carry forward her mission of inclusivity, compassion, and resilience. The day of the ceremony arrived, and as Emily stood before the graduating class, she felt the weight of her legacy settle on her shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt liberating. She spoke from the heart, recounting her journey, the barriers she had faced, and the importance of compassion in a field where empathy was as vital as skill. She urged them to see their patients as people first, to be unafraid of challenging the status quo, and to always fight for the marginalized voices often overlooked in healthcare. As she finished, the crowd rose in applause, a standing ovation that lasted long after she had stepped away from the podium. Emily stood there, taking in the faces of the graduates, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey she had traveled. This was her legacy, not in plaques or titles, but in the lives she had touched and the dreams she had inspired. After the ceremony, she returned home, feeling a deep peace she hadn't known before. She knew her journey would continue, that she still had battles to fight, but she also knew that she had created something lasting, a path for others to follow. Her life was a testament to the power of resilience, of breaking down walls and building bridges, of refusing to let the world's limitations define her. As she looked out the window at the city skyline, Emily felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She was more than a doctor, more than a symbol. She was a legacy in motion, the living reminder that one voice, one life, could indeed change the world. A legacy solidified. Years after Emily Taylor's powerful commencement speech, her legacy had flourished, taking root in ways even she couldn't have foreseen. What started as a personal journey for respect and acceptance had blossomed into a transformative movement that rippled through the healthcare system, educational institutions, and even into policy reforms. The Project Respect initiative had become a national model, implemented in hospitals across the country, bringing diversity, equity, and inclusion to the forefront of medical practice. As Emily sat in her office, now bearing the title Director of Diversity, Equity, and Outreach, she marveled at how far she had come. Her career was no longer a series of personal achievements, but rather a tapestry of lives changed, systems altered, and walls dismantled. Photographs and accolades lined her office walls, but none were as meaningful as the letters and messages from the countless individuals she had inspired over the years. Young doctors, patients, colleagues, and students who had found strength in her story. Her assistant knocked on the door, interrupting her thoughts. "Dr. Taylor, the documentary crew is ready for you in the conference room." Emily nodded, smiling. She still found it surreal that her life was now the subject of a documentary, one that would be aired nationally. The producers wanted to capture not only her journey but the broader impact she had made, shining a light on the systemic changes she had championed. This documentary wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had walked the path with her, everyone who had been touched by her mission. In the conference room, she was greeted by the crew and the interviewer, a young woman named Jasmine who looked visibly excited to be there. Jasmine was a journalist who had followed Emily's work for years, writing numerous articles about the mentorship program and Project Respect's expansion. This documentary was her passion project, a story she believed the world needed to hear. "Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for agreeing to do this," Jasmine said as they sat down. "Your story is, well, it's life-changing. I can't tell you how many people are inspired by what you've done." Emily smiled warmly, feeling the familiar mix of humility and pride. "Thank you, Jasmine. I've always believed that stories have the power to shape lives. I hope this one encourages others to keep pushing, to fight for spaces where they belong." The cameras rolled, and Jasmine began with questions about Emily's childhood, her journey through medical school, and the challenges she faced as a young Black woman entering a field that was often hostile and unwelcoming. Emily spoke candidly, recounting her experiences with vulnerability and strength, aware that her story would reach people who needed to hear it. "Dr. Taylor," Jasmine said, leaning forward, "one of the defining moments of your career was that incident on the bus years ago. It seems to have been a catalyst for everything you've accomplished since. Can you tell us more about how that experience shaped you?" Emily took a deep breath, her mind returning to that cold evening. The humiliation she had felt, the sting of the driver's words. She looked straight into the camera, her gaze steady. "That moment changed me," she said softly. "I realized then that the world wouldn't hand me the respect I deserved. I had to demand it, not just for myself, but for others who faced the same kind of treatment." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "But more than that, it taught me that our experiences, as painful as they are, can be fuel for something greater." That moment lit a fire in me, a resolve to make sure that no one else would feel that same sting of humiliation. It's what drove me to create Project Respect and to devote my life to advocating for change. Jasmine nodded, visibly moved. "And you've certainly done that. But tell me, what's next for you, Dr. Taylor? You've achieved so much. Is there more on the horizon?" Emily's eyes sparkled with the familiar passion that had carried her through every obstacle. "I think there's always more to do, Jasmine. The work of equity and inclusion isn't a destination. It's an ongoing journey. I want to continue expanding mentorship programs, reaching even more young people who feel like they don't belong. And I want to influence policy on a national level, to see real, structural changes in how healthcare is provided to marginalized communities." The interview continued for hours, covering every facet of Emily's journey, her accomplishments, her vision, and her enduring commitment to change. When it finally wrapped, the crew applauded, and Jasmine reached out to shake her hand. "Thank you, Dr. Taylor," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think you're going to change even more lives with this documentary." As the crew packed up and left, Emily felt a sense of peace. Her story, one that had been born out of struggle, would now live on, inspiring generations who would watch and learn, who would see that change was possible even in the face of adversity. Over the next few weeks, the documentary aired to critical acclaim. It ignited conversations nationwide, sparking a renewed interest in equity and inclusion within the medical field and beyond. Letters poured into her office from all over the country, from parents, students, teachers, and even politicians who wanted to learn from her work. Emily became a household name, not just as a doctor but as a trailblazer, an activist, a voice for those who felt voiceless. One day, she received a letter that stood out among the rest. It was handwritten, in careful penmanship, and the return address was from a prison facility. Curiosity piqued. She opened it and began to read. "Dear Dr. Taylor, I don't know if you'll remember me, but I was the bus driver from that day. The day I treated you so poorly. I've watched your documentary, and I can't tell you how ashamed I feel. For years, I carried anger and resentment, blaming the world for my problems. But seeing your story, hearing your words, it made me realize how wrong I was. I was broken, and I tried to break others, including you. I am truly sorry for what I did. I'm writing to ask if there's any way I can help in your mission. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to do something meaningful, to make amends in whatever small way I can. Thank you for your courage, your grace, and your unwavering strength. You've changed more than you know." Emily sat quietly, absorbing the words, feeling the weight of the man's apology. She thought back to that night on the bus, the stain of humiliation she had felt, and the long journey she had traveled since then. The pain he had inflicted had indeed changed her, but it had also led her to a place of strength, resilience, and compassion she might never have discovered otherwise. She put the letter down, a profound sense of closure washing over her. The man who had once symbolized the prejudice and cruelty she fought against had now come full circle, acknowledging his faults and seeking redemption. Her legacy, she realized, was not just in breaking barriers, but in transforming hearts and minds. She penned a thoughtful response, inviting him to contribute to her outreach programs, recognizing that sometimes the journey to change began with a single step toward forgiveness. As she finished the letter, she felt the full weight of her journey settle over her, not as a burden, but as a triumph. She had taken her pain and turned it into purpose, her scars into symbols of resilience. Her life had become a beacon, a testament to the power of one individual to incite change. In the following years, Emily's work continued to grow, inspiring policy changes in healthcare, new mentorship programs nationwide, and a new generation of young doctors who saw her as the standard for compassion, equity, and courage. Her name became synonymous with transformation, a story told to every young doctor, every student of color, and every person who had ever been made to feel invisible. And as she looked around at the world she had helped shape, Emily knew that her legacy was more than secure. It was eternal, a ripple through time. Decades had passed, and Dr. Emily Taylor's legacy had blossomed into something timeless, a legacy woven into the very fabric of modern medicine. Her name was no longer just associated with her groundbreaking work as a neurosurgeon or as the Chief Diversity and Outreach Officer at Westside Medical Center. She had become an institution, a symbol of perseverance, compassion, and unshakable courage. Across the country, hospitals, universities, and communities honored her story, her resilience etched into the hearts and minds of generations. One brisk autumn morning, Emily was invited to speak at the National Medical Heritage Museum, where a new exhibit was being unveiled in her honor. The exhibit, Breaking Boundaries. The life and legacy of Dr. Emily Taylor had been meticulously curated to tell the story of her journey, her triumphs, and her contributions to medicine and society. It was a collection of artifacts and testimonials, a vivid chronicle of the battles she'd fought and the lives she changed. The museum hall buzzed with guests, young and old, doctors, students, and admirers who had gathered to pay tribute to the woman whose story had touched them so deeply. Emily walked through the hall with Alicia by her side. Alicia had risen to become one of the top neurosurgeons in the country, a trailblazer in her own right, and had taken up the mantle of overseeing Project Respect, which had expanded into a nationwide initiative supporting thousands of students, interns, and healthcare workers. "Dr. Taylor, this is all because of you," Alicia said, her voice filled with emotion as they walked through the exhibit. Every life touched by this project, every wall broken down, it all started with you. Emily placed a gentle hand on Alicia's arm. It started with all of us, Alicia. I may have lit the spark, but each person who has carried it forward has kept that flame alive. You've all taken it to heights I could never have imagined. They moved from display to display, passing artifacts from Emily's journey, her medical school diploma, worn pages from her early mentorship journals, photos from rallies, and even her first pair of scrubs, stained and frayed from years of use. Each artifact told a part of her story, but it was the personal testimonies, written letters, recordings, and videos from mentees, colleagues, and patients that gave the exhibit its true heart. One video in particular stopped Emily in her tracks. It featured Sarah, a young woman who had been one of her first mentees, someone who had nearly dropped out of medical school before Emily's guidance helped her find her confidence. Now a successful physician, Sarah spoke of how Emily's encouragement had saved her career. I didn't just become a doctor because of Dr. Taylor. Sarah's voice echoed through the exhibit space. I became someone who believes in herself. She taught me that my identity and my background are not obstacles but strengths. She made me see that my voice matters, and because of her, I carry that lesson into every patient interaction, every surgery, every moment of my career. Emily watched the video in silence, moved to tears. Her influence had extended far beyond what she'd envisioned. The legacy she had worked so tirelessly to create had become a chain, a connection that stretched across generations and continued to grow. She felt a profound gratitude, not just for what she'd accomplished, but for every person who had joined her on the journey, each one adding their own strength to the cause. As she moved to the next section, she saw something unexpected. A handwritten letter in a glass case, penned by the bus driver from that life-changing incident so many years ago. The letter was titled, "An Apology to Dr. Emily Taylor," and detailed the transformation he had undergone after watching her documentary. He described how Emily's grace and forgiveness had inspired him to volunteer at her outreach programs, how he had shared his story with young people, urging them to recognize the power of empathy and respect. Reading his words, Emily felt a deep sense of closure. The man who had once embodied society's cruelty had found redemption, becoming an ally in her cause. It was a testament to the ripple effect her life had created. A single act of forgiveness, like a stone cast into still waters, had spread outward, touching lives she might never know. As the ceremony began, Emily took her place on the stage, standing before a packed room of eager faces. The years had etched lines on her face, but her eyes still held the same fierce determination, the same spark that had driven her through every hardship. The crowd fell silent as she began to speak, her voice steady, carrying the wisdom of a lifetime. I stand here today, not just as an individual, but as part of a greater legacy, she began, her words resonant and clear. This journey, this movement, was never about one person. It has always been about all of us, about each of you who has ever felt unseen, unheard, undervalued. It's about every patient who deserves a doctor who sees them fully, every student who dreams of breaking boundaries, every person who refuses to let the world define them. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. We live in a world that still struggles to see people for who they truly are. But I believe that with every act of courage, every stand we take, we bring that world a little closer to a place where everyone belongs, where respect and dignity are not privileges but rights. As she spoke, she saw the faces in the audience shift, her words sinking deep, reaching them in the way she had always hoped her story would. Many were students, some doctors, and others simply admirers of her journey, but each was there because they had found a piece of themselves in her story. Emily concluded her speech, her voice full of conviction. When you leave here today, know that this story is not over. Each of you has the power to carry it forward. Let your lives be the next chapters in this journey. Stand tall, speak out, break every boundary that tells you no, and let nothing, no one, ever tell you that you don't belong. The applause was thunderous, reverberating through the hall, but it was more than just appreciation. It was a promise from those who had gathered, a collective vow to carry her mission into the future. As she stepped down from the stage, people approached her, each sharing their own stories of how she had inspired them, how her journey had altered the course of their lives. That evening, as the crowd dispersed and the museum grew quiet, Emily took one last walk through the exhibit. She stopped in front of a framed photograph of herself as a young doctor, her gaze fierce, determined, yet quietly hopeful. She remembered the girl she had been, the battles she had fought, the nights she had spent questioning her place in the world. She placed a hand on the glass, as if connecting with that young woman she had once been, the one who had stepped onto a bus and faced humiliation, but rose from it, fueled by a purpose she couldn't yet understand. She whispered softly, as though speaking directly to her younger self, "You did it. You changed the world." As she left the museum, the sky was painted with hues of twilight, the city lights twinkling against the darkening horizon. She knew her work would continue, that her story would live on in the lives of those who found strength in her journey. Her legacy was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone she had touched, a living testament to the power of resilience, courage, and hope. And as she walked into the night, her steps steady and assured, Emily knew that her life had become more than a story. It was a movement, a force that would ripple through time, inspiring generations to stand up, speak out, and break every boundary that dared to hold them back.